Hi, I'm Rachel Alexandria, psychotherapist and Enneagram teacher, and I'm going to give you a very brief run through of my impressions of Enneagram types, just so that you can have the start of an initiation to the Enneagram. Let me caveat by saying that this is really about your path to self-discovery and to understanding other people, so take this with the grain of salt that it is my interpretation. Take what works for you and leave the rest. So starting with type 1. Type 1 is often referred to as the perfectionist or the reformer. My impression of type 1 is very straight posture, very rigid in some cases, and I'm going to be speaking to the average of all types, not the highest level and not the lowest level usually, but average personality type. Very rigid, a little bit cool, and I'm going to actually modify my speaking voice too. Very by the rules. There is a certain way to do something and a way to not do it. There's a black and white. An example of a type 1 would be, for instance, Monica from Friends, or Brian from The Breakfast Club, Anthony Michael Hall's character. It's a very rules-following, very inner critic oriented type. And what type 1s are working on in the world is learning to stop the self-judgment and find more of their own forgiveness for themselves and the world. So kind of loosening up a little inside of their selves and allowing themselves their own freedom to move in their progression toward type 7. Each of the Enneagram points has two connecting points. Type 2, I'll shift into a little bit, I often describe it as more of a elementary school type. There's more smiles, bigger eyes, and it tends to be more warm and relational. They're often people who really interview, like, so what happened when you did this, or how was that for you? It's a really projected, engaged energy. And an example of some type 2s would be, if you've ever watched How I Met Your Mother, the character of Lily is a very, and she actually happens to be a kindergarten teacher, but it's a very sort of big-eyed, engaged relational type. And what type 2s are working on, because they establish relationships on the average level, sometimes in a transactional way. So in that show, for example, there's a point where the character of Lily gets really mad at her friends because they don't hate the same people she hates, even though she can't remember why she hates them. There's this expectation of relationships to contribute back equally to what they deposited into them. So the challenge for 2s is, at a deep level, to find that holy love within and give selflessly, like, for example, Mother Teresa, who's often cited as a type 2 at the highest level. Type 3 is, I'll shift a little bit into type 3. It's, you'll notice a lot of TV news anchors are type 3s. There's a little bit more of a coldness to the eye, a little bit more of a glittering in the eye. And an example of a type 3 would be, so Andrew Clark from The Breakfast Club, which is Emilio Estevez's character. And also, if you watch How I Met Your Mother, Barney Stinson is a very classic type 3. So they're engaged, but more than anything, they're often referred to as the achiever. They're more focused on what's going to make them successful. And sometimes they're doing that as service, but their primary focus is not on the person, but on the goal. So you don't really want to get in the way of a 3 when they're on their way to the goal, because they can be ruthless. So what 3s are working on is not achievement for achievement's sake, but finding what their true heart's passion is and really locating that inside of themselves, being more internally focused rather than externally focused. And once they find their heart's passion, then applying that amazing can-do spirit to that goal. And I'll say, as I'm going through these are just a few pieces of information about type. This is a life path. So I'm just getting you started on the very, very beginning nuggets. Type 4, I'll shift into a little bit, is more like it's often referred to as the artist, and they can be a bit softer a lot of times. 4s love to wear scarves. A lot of the 4s I know, they're also very funny, and they care a lot about beauty and creativity. Sometimes they can be kind of shy, more of an observer than an interactor, unless they've become a performer, but then that's often just the persona. So an example of a 4 would be from The Breakfast Club, Ali Sheedy's character Allison, who she's kind of like a slightly less healthy 4, but you see her drawing like with that pen, that amazing piece of artwork, but she's also really kind of like with the hair and the, that sort of experience. So 4's challenge, because they're very emotional people, because they go into these big depths of the ocean of their emotion and they expect everyone to follow them, and most of us can't swim that deeply. Their challenge is to remember that feelings aren't facts, like to validate and be with their feeling, but then to come back up, coming more towards 1, which is their connecting point, and finding a logical, pragmatic space to operate from, rather than getting sidetracked into what can eventually become the drama of their feelings and experience, while still pursuing beauty and everything else that they care about. Type 5, I'll shift into a little bit here. Type 5, a very typical example would be Spock from the Star Trek series, or Velma, the character of Velma from Scooby-Doo. Type 5 is often referred to as the observer and can also come across sometimes as cold, very research-oriented, a bit pulled back. I know a lot of Type 5s tend to wear glasses. I know Spock doesn't, but Velma does. That's one of the things I look for when I'm assessing is, did this person wear glasses? And it's not because they're the only ones with vision problems, but because there's an aspect of one step back from the world when you look at the world through glasses. I need glasses, but for myself, I wear contacts. So Type 5s, their challenge is to come forward from the place of observation and sometimes sarcasm or I don't want to say derision, but there's a way that from their vantage point of being very smart and observant, they can look at everybody like, why haven't you figured this out yet? And their challenge can be to come forward with more heart and come into their physicality, their embodiment, heading toward 8 on their connecting point, and become more of a leader and engaged in their life. Moving to Type 6. Type 6 is one of the harder types to describe, and a lot of people at 6 have been misidentified or don't know that that's them. One of the ways I know 6s is they have a little bit of a suspicious eye, that's what I call it, where they look a little bit from the side, like this. Like, they struggle with fear a lot of the time, but you would never know it by looking at them because they're very likable. And what is important to understand about 6s is that's a strategy. Being likable is a really good way to have the world be a less scary place and have less potential attack coming toward you. So 6s are very strategic. And you might think you can just up and become friends with a 6, but oftentimes you're not as close as you think. So 6s can look like too sometimes, but look for more of the little bit of like the side eye instead of the like, wow, engage straight on all the time, especially if you come at them in a way that they're surprised. If a 2 is surprised, to be like, hey, wow, so amazing to see you. And a 6 might be like, oh, hi, but a little bit more of that. An example or two of type 6 would be Sally from When Harry Met Sally. You can see kind of he even describes at the end of the movie that little furrow in the brow. That's the little trying to figure out if this is safe or not. That's the little piece of skeptic in the 6 that's like, I'm not sure if this is safe. Another example would be the lion from The Wizard of Oz, like a more inflated, experience of the fear, and then the conquering of the fear, like, roar, coming forward. Type 7 is often referred to, I'll shift a little bit into that, is often referred to as the bon vivant or the adventurer. And they have a lot of like energy, especially when they're rested enough or when there's people around. They can get really engaged. And unlike the 2 where there's engagement, which is more about the other, 7 engagement is more about the magnetism and the energy that they're generating right in the moment. I happen to be an 8 with a 7 wing, so sometimes in my video you'll even see I can kind of pull on that 7 energy to be like, hey, there you are. So a couple examples of type 7 would be Ferris Bueller from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And I think that was the example I had. There might have been another one, but I forgot it already. That's actually a little bit more 72. Like they have so many ideas firing in their brain, which makes them really magnetic. And at the same time, it can be hard to sustain focus, to come back into like a grounded, centered place. And that's actually 7's challenge. 7's challenge is to learn to circle their wagons, come to center, and not be so suggestible to the fear of missing out and all the different influences in the world, but to come back into more of an internal place and find what's really speaking to them. Type 8 is often called the boss, the challenger. One of my favorite authors calls it the master, because 8's job is to learn to find self-mastery, because there are so many energies and talents that come with being 8, but also a lot of responsibility. Shifting more into the 8 vibe looks like this. The 8 pure energy doesn't really care about you or many things at all. Like, it's a very hard no. It's often challenging for me to do a full 8 into camera or in an audience, because in order to engage you, like you see me kind of pulling it in again, I can't be full only 8. Because examples of type 8 would be like The Godfather, or like John Bender from The Breakfast Club, Judd Nelson's character. It really doesn't give a crap. I would actually, swear. Usually it really doesn't give a shit. So 8s are really focused on control. And what's important for 8s to learn to do is find ways to let people in, to let themselves be helped, and to surrender control, even though we don't like talking about it, as you'll see from the tapping for type videos. But to exert that self-mastery, not by always being in control, but also by knowing when to be in the give and take and the flow of life. And lastly, type 9. Type 9 is often referred to as the peacemaker, which can be kind of confusing for 9s, because they're not actively out there trying to resolve conflicts. It's just something that they will do in as a last resort, first of all, if that's what's happening, kind of like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo is what I think of as a type 9. And also Cameron from Ferris Bueller's Day Off is another example. That they are more conflict avoidant than they are actively peacemaking, but they sort of exude this, like, more of a mellow energy. And sometimes in a room they can even disappear. Like, I sometimes, looking at images of type 9s, I can sort of see beyond their eyes, like the energy kind of goes whoosh. So type 9's challenge is to come more fully into the world, to land and to not avoid the things that are important to them. So that's a really, really quick overview of the Enneagram. I know there's a lot of points we didn't get to cover, but hopefully that gives you just an entry space to see a little bit of the energy of some of the types. And if you'd like to learn more, come visit me over on healingforgoodgirls.com and go into the menu and select Enneagram.